We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 18b. And the previous Amud, the Gemara asked, when you have Chatzi Nezek Tzroros, does that pay Migufo or does that pay Me'aliyah? And the Gemara initially brought a proof from a Mishnah. The Mishnah was dealing with a Kelev Shenat al Charara. This is talking about a situation where a dog is taking a biscuit and then it's a hot biscuit and there's also a coal involved and lights a fire to a gadish, to a pile of grain. And so the Gemara initially assumed that was a case of Tzroros. And the Gemara said, we have a brisa there that says you pay Migufo. It seems to be a proof that you pay Migufo. The Gemara said, well, that can't be the case because the brisa also brings a sheet of Rebbe Lazar that you pay Nezek Shalem. And the Gemara initially assumes that Rebbe Lazar holds like Simchus, that you pay Nezek Shalem always by Tzroros, but you certainly would not pay, according to Simchus, you certainly would not pay Nezek Shalem Migufo by Tzroros because it's a regular normal case of Nezek Shalem, according to Simchus. And so then the Gemara reinterprets the Mishnah and the brisa and says it's actually talking where the animal, the Kelev, did something that was strange. It took the coal directly in its mouth, and therefore we're talking about a regular situation of Keren. And when you have Keren, you pay Chatzi Nezek Migufo, of course, and Rebbe Lazar will hold that you pay Nezek Shalem like Rabbi Tarfon because you're in the Chatzar HaNizik, and Rabbi Tarfon holds anytime you're in the Chatzar HaNizik, you pay Nezek Shalem, and that would be Migufo. But then the Gemara went back and said, no, maybe the Mishnah and the Brisa actually are talking about regular cases of Tzroros, and the reason why you're going to pay Migufo according to Rebbe Lazar, even though it's Nezek Shalem, it would seem to be a normal case of Nezek Shalem that pays Min Ha'aliyah, but maybe Rebbe Lazar holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Sad Tamos b'Makom Medis, that by a regular case of a tam that turns into a muad, but still that first half payment pays Migufo, and maybe that's the same by Tzroros as well. But the Gemara then says you can't really say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda only says that by an animal that starts out as a tam, let's say by a case of Keren, and starts out as a tam and becomes a muad, so then we say Tzad Tamas b'Makomo Medis. But would we really say that, Misha Matle, would we really understand, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that in a situation of Tzroros, where the animal is starting off as a muad, that you're going to say Tzad Tamas b'Makomo Medis? That wouldn't even make sense, so you can't possibly explain the Mishnah and the Brisa in that fashion. And so the Gemara instead says, no, but we do have a way of explaining the Mishnah and Brisa as talking about regular Tzroros. Elaki Kamma Rebbe Lazar, but rather, what was Rebbe Lazar? When did Rebbe Lazar say that you pay Nezek Shalem Migufo? How can you make that make sense by a regular case of Tzroros? Nezek Shalem, when do you pay Nezek Shalem? Could go into Iyayid. Rashi is going to have two interpretations of this, but the idea is that you could have a concept of Tzroros becoming a muad and paying Nezek Shalem. Uvha Kamiflagi, and they're arguing in the following, Mar Savar Yesh Hadol Tzroros. One says there's a concept by Tzroros of becoming a muad. Umar Savar Ein Hadol Tzroros. And the other one says there is no concept of becoming a muad when it comes to Tzroros. Rashi explains, Misha Matzle, Halo Havala Tamas Meolam. Again, by a regular case of Tzroros, the animal doesn't start out as a tam. Vibit Tzroros Kiorche, so if it's a regular case of Tzroros, Mukmislaf, that's how you're understanding the Mishnah and the Brisa. Ulamivshat, the Tzroros Migufo Mashalim, you're trying to say that you see from this Mishnah and Brisa that Tzroros pays Migufo. The Rebbe Lazar Tikshi, you're still going to be back to a question by Rebbe Lazar, because if you're paying Nezek Shalem by regular Tzroros, according to Rebbe Lazar, certainly it will not be Migufo, and you cannot give this answer of Tzad Tamas B'Makom Medis. And so then the Gemara says, no, there is a way to say that this Mishnah and Brisa are talking about regular Tzroros. If you want to try to say that this Mishnah and Brisa are talking about regular Tzroros, and say that they are answering the question of Rava, and that we really do pay Migufo by Chatzi Nezek Tzroros, Lo Tukma b'Tzroros Dechadzim. Now don't say we're talking about Tzroros that happens the first time. And it's a regular case of Tzroros. Because then you're right, you're not going to be able to explain Rebbe Lazar. You can't have Nezek Shalem Migufo. Ella b'deshani b'Tzroros. Again, this is the first interpretation of Rashi. Rather, the case is that it's actually Tzroros with a shinoi. And then it happens three times. That means that now it becomes, after three times, it now converts into normal. First it was Tzroros that was not normal, and now it's Tzroros that's normal. In that case, the Rabbanan say it's Chatzi Nezek like any other case of Tzroros. The normal case of Tzroros where it's a normal activity, that's a muad mitchilas. And over here where it was a strange kind of Tzroros, that becomes normal. So it's a regular Tzroros, you only pay Chatzi Nezek, that's it. So here we have a strange kind of Tzroros that becomes normal because it's repeated. That's like a regular case where it's a normal case of Tzroros, muad mitchilaso, vein hadol Tzroros, shashino behen. You don't have a concept of muad by Tzroros of a shinoi, migufo, and from the fact that it says migufo, al Tzroros kior chenami migufo. You see that Tzroros in general pays migufo. Rabbi Lazar holds to Tzroros kior chayu kerabanan de pligia samches. Rabbi Lazar holds like the Tzroros by a normal case of Tzroros, you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek like the Rabbanan, not like Sumchis. V'shani v'yayid nafkam, he told the regel v'nasa Masa told it to Karen. However, if according to Rebbe Lozer, if you have a situation where it does a strange kind of tzroros 3 times and then becomes muad, that actually goes into the category of Karen instead of the category of regel of tzroros. V'yeshlen hadol l'shalem nezek sholim hachatzi migufo detzat tamas b'mekom omedes. You're going to pay nezek sholim, and half of it will be migufo because tzat tamas b'mekom omedes v'chatzi min ha'aliyah, and half of it will be min ha'aliyah. And that's how we can interpret that. In this case, we're talking about regular tzroros, and we are bringing a proof that tzroros pays migufo, but we're talking about a case where in this case it actually started as not normal and became normal after happening 3 times, and that's how you can explain Rebbe Lozer as well. And Rashi continues with a second understanding of the Gemara, Lishnachrin, another version understanding of the Gemara, Ela b'diyayid b'tzroros ki'orchayu. Maybe we're simply talking about tzroros, regular tzroros that actually happens 3 times. Telos azim, it happens 3 times. Uvah pligi, and there's actually machlokas about this. Rebbe Lozer savar yesh hadol tzroros keshar chatzi nisokin. Rebbe Lozer holds that you can have a concept of muad by tzroros just like any other chatzi nezek. Sheboin al yedei hadol echlal nezek sholim. Just like by Karen, after 3 times it becomes nezek sholim. So too by regular tzroros, according to the Gemara. Here also it happens 3 times. You'll pay nezek sholim, but in the first half you'll pay migufo. Kach shamati ve'ikr. Rashi says this is what I heard, and this is the second one is the main explanation. Some are not sure whether ve'ikr should really be in Rashi. Is Rashi really saying that this is the good explanation because Rashi is about to ask on this explanation? Aval koshali, Rashi says it's difficult to me the second explanation. If the first time it's considered normal and you pay chazi nezek, mali chazimna, mali me'azimna. Who cares if it's 1 time or 100 times? Why does that suddenly make it nezek shalim? And in any case, the Gemara continues, if this is the explanation of the Mishnah / Braisa, elahad by Rava, but this was actually a question of Rava, because Rava asked the question, yesh hadol tzroros, so ein hadol tzroros, is there a concept of becoming a muad by tzroros or not? So we have exactly this machlokus. Ilu rabbanan ein hadol tzroros. If we're following the rabbanan, apparently there's not a concept of muad by tzroros. Ilu Rebbe Lozer yesh hadol tzroros. And if we're following Rebbe Lozer, there is a concept of muad by tzroros. So this would be answering that question. And the Gemara says, Amar lach Rava, Rava can respond to you, even though Rava had this question, he'll respond as follows, Ki mi boi li lididi ali b'derabbanan de pligi oled de simchus. I actually was only asking the question according to the Rabbanan who argue on simchus. According to the Rabbanan who have a concept of chatzi nezek tzroros, I was asking the question. Aval hacha, but over here what we could say is as follows, Bein l'Rabbanan, bein l'Rebbe Lozer, really both of the Rabbanan and Rebbe Lozer, ke simchus svir l'hu damar tzroros nezek shalim mishalim. They actually both hold like simchus that regular cases of tzroros would actually pay nezek sholim. V'tayim amai omer rabbanan chatzi nezek, and what's the reason why the rabbanan said chatzi nezek? Deshani v'lo ayayid, because you have a situation where it did it in a strange way and it hadn't become a muad. Uveplug so the Rabbi Tarfon v'rabbanan kamiflagi, and this is actually a machlokus. What's actually going on is you have the machlokus between Rabbi Tarfon and the rabbanan over here b'chatzar hanizik. In other words, it could be what's happening over here is you have a situation where it's chatzi nezek because it did it in a strange fashion, and it's b'chatzar hanizik, and the rabbanan say chatzi nezek, and Rabbi Tarfon says nezek sholim. But the Gemara says, Eimer de shamatle Rabbi Tarfon nezek sholim migufo mishamatle. But even if you're going to give this interpretation, and you're going to say we're following, Rabbi Lozer's following Rabbi Tarfon, we understand that he says nezek sholim, but would he say that happens even, that it's even migufo? And the Gemara says, yes, mehecha ma'isila, because from where does he learn this idea, that it's nezek sholim, mi Karen, mi Rishos Harabim? He learns it from Karen and Rishos Harabim. Dayo lavo min adin lios kanidon. Once you're learning from a source, you have to learn it totally from that source, just like over there it's migufo, so too over here it is migufo. And we should note over here that the Gemara essentially is going back now to its original answer on the previous Amud and saying that this Mishnah / Brisa is not talking about regular case of tzroros. It's no proof that chatzi nezek tzroros is migufo. Rather, we're talking about a situation of a shinoi. We're talking about a situation essentially of Karen, and it's really just a machlokus whether Karen b'shos nezek is chatzi nezek or nezek sholim. And again, the Gemara is saying regardless, it's always going to be migufo. Even if it's nezek sholim, it will be migufo. And Rashi explains, from where does Rabbi Tarfon even know this concept when you have a situation of shinoi of Karen b'chatzar hanizik that you pay nezek sholim? Mi Karen b'Rishos Harabim, he actually learns it out from Karen in Rishos Harabim, Kidim Afarish b'Masechet, that's explained later on in the Mishnah. Hilkach dayo lova min adin lios kanido, and therefore if you're learning out, when you learn out from a source, you can't go further than the source itself. Umalahalan migufo, just like over there by Karen b'Rishos Harabim, the payment is migufo. Afkan migufo, so too, even though it's nezek sholim, when you're talking about chatzar hanizik, according to Rabbi Tarfon, it's still going to be a payment that is migufo. But the Gemara continues, Rabbi Tarfon less le dayo, but Rabbi Tarfon clearly doesn't hold of the concept of dayo, because if he's learning out Keren and Chatzar HaNizik from Keren and Rishos Harabim, but Keren and Rishos Harabim is Chatzi Nezik, and he's going further in Chatzar HaNizik. He's saying it's paying Nezik Shalim. So how can you suddenly apply dayo by the idea of Migufo if you're not applying it by the idea of Chatzi Nezik? And the Gemara answers to that, Ki les le dayo hechad demifrach kal v'chomer. He only does not hold of dayo when you have some kind of refutation to the kal v'chomer. Hechad lo mifrach kal v'chomer is le dayo. But if you have no refutation to the kal v'chomer, then he does hold of the concept of dayo. As Rashi explains, Rabbi Tarfon les le dayo di is le dayo, because if Rabbi Tarfon held of dayo, lo yishalem al chatzi nezik, then you'd only pay half when you're b'chatzar hanizik, Keren b'rishos harabim, just like Keren and rishos harabim. And the Gemara says, no, ki les le dayo hechad demifrach kal v'chomer. If you have some kind of refutation to the kal v'chomer, kagon, meaning as follows. For example, you have amrinan dayo de lo mishalem al palga. Let's say you said dayo and you only paid chatzi nezik in Chatzar HaNizik, so then Maya Hanilan Kal V'chomer, you wouldn't even need the Kal V'chomer anymore. Hamikra Nami Shamin de Rishos HaNizik Lo Gara. From the pasuk also, Rishos HaNizik is going to be no worse than Rishos Harabim. You're certainly going to at least pay Chatzi Nezik from the outset. So therefore, the Kal V'chomer has to be adding something to Habikra B'Negichas Tam Lo Ksiv Rishos Harabim. It doesn't say Rishos Harabim when it talks about the idea of a Tam goring. Aval Hecha de Lo Mifrach Kal V'chomer. But if you have a situation where the Kal V'chomer still works and you could apply dayo, so Islay dayo, then he does hold of dayo. Here the Kal V'chomer tells us Nezek Shalim, because Chatzi Nezek we already know. So it tells us Nezek Shalim in the Chatzar HaNizik. V'hani le dayo l'migufo. Then we use the concept of dayo to say that the payment is limited, that it's only migufo. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above. Boy, Rava asks the following question: Yesh hadol etzroros, or ein hadol etzroros? Is there a concept of becoming a muad by tzroros or not? Lekeren midamin. And later we say it's similar to Keren, where there is a concept of muad. O dilma told of the regel, or no? Maybe we say tzroros is like a told of regel. There's no concept of becoming a muad. And the Gemara says, Tashma, coming here a proof from the brisa we mentioned above several times. Hidus eino muad v'yesh omrim harei muad. Again, if the chicken is dancing, it's not a muad. Some say it is a muad. Hidus al. Do you think it's dancing directly on the objects and breaking them? Then of course it's a muad. Elahidus v'hitas. Rather the case must be it's dancing and then the pebbles, they come up. It's basically a case of tzroros. And my love, is it not? Kagon David Tzlosa Zimne. That's exactly this case. It happened 3 times. Uvaha Kamiflagi, and the Brises are arguing about the following. Mar Savar Yeshada. One says there's a concept that after 3 times it becomes like a muad. Umar Savar Einada. The other one says that there's no concept of becoming a muad. And the Gemara says, Lo, no, Bechadzim. It could be this is the very first time. Uvaplugsa the Sumchas v'Rabbanan Kamiflagi. It could be this is just the regular Machlokas Sumchas and the Rabbanan. What happens by tzroros? Is it Chatzi Nezek or is it Nezek Shalim? And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Machlokas Amoroim. Behema Shitila Gulolim Le'isa. Let's say a behema drops excrement on dough. Rav Yehuda Omer Meshalem Nezek Shalim. If Rebbe Lazar Omer Chatzi Nezek, Rav Yehuda says it's Nezek Shalim, and Rebbe Lazar says Chatzi Nezek. My lav is it not? Kagon David Tzlosa Zimne. Maybe it's the same thing. It happened 3 times. Uvaha Kamiflagi, and they're arguing about this exact issue. Mar Savar Yesh Hado, Mar Savar Ein Hado. One says there's a concept of muad when it comes to tzroros, and the other one says no. And the Gemara says, Lo, no, bechadzim, there could be this happened the first time. Uvepluksa the sumchas v'rabbanon kamiflagi. This is just the regular machlokas sumchas and the rabbanon, whether tzroros is chatzi nezek or nezek shalim. But the Gemara says, v'meshunu, but the Gemara says, 1 second, it's a little strange for an animal to drop excrement on dough, and therefore it should be chatzi nezek because it's considered to be strange. And the Gemara says, no, in this case, maybe it wasn't strange. The dochak le'alma was forced into this area, in this position. There was nowhere else for the animal to go. But the Gemara still says, v'leimer Rav Yehuda halacha kesumchas, v'leimer Rav Elazar halacha k'rabbanan. This is just a machlokas amoraim. Why doesn't Rav Yehuda just say the halacha is like sumchas nezek shalim, and Rav Elazar should say the halacha is like the rabbanan chatzi nezek? What do you have to go through this whole case of behema shetila glolam leisa if one is just going like sumchas and one is going like the rabbanan? And the Gemara answers to that, Gelolim Mitzrichle. It could be that the Chiddush over here is that by the dropping of excrement, maybe you wouldn't think that's tzroros. They're really teaching you that is tzroros. I might think that since that really follows the body, it's like the body itself. So Kamash Molan, that's what the Chiddush over here really is, that this is considered to be a classic case of tzroros. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here another proof, the Tanya Rami Bar Yecheskel, because Rami Bar Yecheskel taught, Tarnagol Shehoshet Rosho La'aver Kli Zechuches, if a chicken chicken sticks its head into the airspace of a glass vessel, v'takabo v'shivro, and then it makes a noise in there and it causes it to break, mishalim nezek shalim, the payment's going to be nezek shalim. V'yamar Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef says, Amri Bei Rav, they said in the yeshiva of Rav, sus shetzonaf, if you have a horse that neighs, v'chamor shenir, or you have a donkey that brays, v'shibra es kalim, and that causes kalim to break, mishalim chatzi nezek, you pay chatzi nezek. So you have some kind of machlokas over here by tzroros, whether it's chatzi nezek or nezek shalim. My lav is it not? Kagon David Tlasazimne. Again, the machlokas over here is that it happened 3 times. It's this exact machlokas about whether there is muad by tzroros or not, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yotes Amud Aleph.